Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on which part of the world you're logging in from. I'm Steve Tcherchian. I'm the Chief Product Officer and Chief Information Security Officer at XYPRO. And thank you for joining our webinar today. We're presenting this webinar jointly with CyberArk, who's one of our partners. And we've got Brian Carpenter, Director of Business Development from CyberArk, on the webinar with us. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for the invite.
Okay.
Appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk about the great integration that we have in place with XYPRO.
Yeah, our pleasure, and thank you for joining us. So we'll introduce XYPRO as a company, and then I'll hand this over to Brian to introduce CyberArk and their solutions. And then towards the tail end, we'll talk about our co-integration that we've got between NonStop, XYPRO, and CyberArk, and how you can bring your NonStop into the enterprise picture and integrate that with your CyberArk deployment. Also, if you've got any questions, please put those in the chat. We'll address those at the end. The organizer will pick it up, and Brian and I will have a Q&A with any questions you want to ask towards the end of the presentation. So a little bit about XYPRO. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with XYPRO. We've been in the mission critical security space since 1983. We're headquartered in Southern California in Simi Valley. Experts in cybersecurity compliance, database management was recently added to our portfolio. We've got global sales and support offices all over the world. So regardless of where your time zone is, what country you're from, we've got support reps ready to assist you in your time zone in your region. Obviously, we've got a partnership with HPE as a couple of our solutions come delivered as part of the NonStop operating system. And we've got new partnerships with SailPoint, who's the market leader in identity and access management solutions, and CyberArk, who Brian was joining us on our presentation today. We'll talk about their privileged access management solution. And then obviously we've been focusing a lot on our security, intelligence, and analytics platform, which we presented on previously. But today's focus is going to be integrating your NonStop with CyberArk. And with that being said, Brian, I'm going to hand this over to you to take over.
Great. Thanks a lot, Steve. So I'll start off talking a little bit about CyberArk, then I'll get into our products and how we can help your organization become more secure and more identity-centric when it comes to security. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by identity-centric in a little bit. So CyberArk, we've been a company for over 20 years, and during that time, we've been focused on one thing, and that's securing privileged credentials. You'll see various magic quadrants and things like that where CyberArk has been identified as the leader in this space. So when we have #1 leader in privileged access management, we have Gartner and Forrester and things like that to support those claims. In addition, we have over 5,500 clients globally, as well as more than 50% of the Fortune 500. We have a broad portfolio of tools to help secure privileged credentials. Steve, oh, there we go. And why are privileged credentials important? Why is it important to secure privileged credentials? Well, attackers know if they get access to privileged credentials, they have the keys to the kingdom. And you can see by all the different articles on the screen that this is what attackers are looking for when they gain access to environments. They know when they get access to those privileged credentials, they have the ability to exfiltrate data, they have the ability to damage systems and so on. So they have the ability to do a lot of damage when they get the access to those privileged credentials. And don't just take CyberArk's word for it. Look at the Mandiant M-Trends report or the Forrester report, and if you look through the different incidents that they've responded to over the last year, and this you can go back several years, the majority, if not all, of the attacks that they've investigated involve privileged credentials. In fact, for 2019, the Forrester report indicated it was over 80% of the incidents that they responded to involved compromised or stolen privileged credentials. And privilege is everywhere. When you look at organizations, most organizations have at least 3 times as many privileged credentials as they have employees. It's every piece of hardware, software, human, non-human, other applications, things like robots. If you think of robotic process automation, which is very popular now, robots need credentials in order to do their job. If you think about SIMs and SOARs and the workflows that are created with the SOAR tools, they need credentials in order to connect to other applications and databases and things like that. So it's not only those human heartbeat users that need access to those credentials, but it's also all the applications and robots and things like that. And that creates a pretty large attack surface. And being able to manage that manually is a pretty daunting task. It's not only making sure that those credentials are rotated in accordance with company policy, but it's also making sure that they meet complexity requirements, are unique, and so on. And to do that manually is a significant amount of manual effort. And a lot of you have probably seen this before. It's the attack chain lifecycle. And the way it usually works is either an external attacker gaining access via phishing attack, or an inside attacker misusing their credentials. And they establish a foothold, they perform reconnaissance, move laterally throughout the network until they're able to get to what they're looking for. They're performing reconnaissance, and then when they're ready, they are able to either exfiltrate data, like we talked about earlier, or disrupt business. CyberArk provides security from the inside out by securing, monitoring, and blocking the privileged attack pathway, preventing attackers from stealing data and disrupting business. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the products that CyberArk has to offer that can secure those privileged credentials on the front side, as well as monitor activity and identify potential attacks in progress, and give companies the ability to automate the process of not only managing those credentials and monitoring them, but disrupting those attacks and hopefully preventing those attackers from gaining the access that they're attempting to get. I mentioned earlier how CyberArk was identified as a leader in the Magic Quadrant by Gartner and Forrester. Here's a screen that shows the most recent Magic Quadrant. There will be another one coming out later this year, and CyberArk is fully expecting to be identified as the continued leader in this space. So I'll go over a little bit. I've mentioned CyberArk. We've been a company for 20 years, and as I mentioned, during that time, we've been focused on one thing, and that's securing privileged credentials. So we have a whole portfolio of products that help do just that. If you look in the middle of the diagram here, or the graphic here, you'll see the core privileged access security. And core privileged access security is really made up of a couple of different components. The first is the enterprise password vault. Enterprise password vault is where credentials are stored. They're rotated in accordance with company policy. They're monitored. We monitor the usage of those credentials, and we could share that information with tools like SIMs and SOARs that can then use that information for reporting, analytics, and so on. We're also recording activities, so we're able to record activities. So if there is a situation where you need to perform forensics and do an investigation, we're able to provide video recordings of every mouse click and keystroke that a user performs while using those privileged credentials. We're analyzing that activity as well, and generating alerts that can be automated to either block a user or rotate that user's credentials. And we integrate with SIMs and SOARs for those capabilities as well. And it's not only passwords, but also SSH keys. And really, when you think about the enterprise password vault and core PAS, I mentioned something about identity centric earlier. And if you think of an organization that has an admin group, for example, that admin group may need access to the admin credentials in order to do their job. Without a tool like CyberArk, a lot of times it's really difficult to identify who within that admin group is leveraging those credentials. You know it was somebody from that group at 11:13 a.m. on June 24th, but you don't know exactly who it was. With CyberArk, now you're going to be able to be more identity centric. You're going to know exactly who it was that logged in and exactly what they were doing when they leveraged those credentials. So allowing an organization to become more identity centric. Next is Alero. Alero is a zero trust SaaS solution that gives just-in-time passwordless access to remote users. No VPN, no agent, and leverages biometric multi-factor authentication. Great solution for those remote users that need access to different assets within your organization and need that privileged access. Endpoint Privilege Manager on the far left gives organizations the ability to enforce least privilege on the endpoint, control apps, and block credential theft while protecting against malware and ransomware. It allows organizations to create an approved list and a blocked list for applications that they want their representatives to either be able to download without admin credentials or to block them from downloading potentially malicious applications. For anything that isn't listed in that approved list or block list, there is a gray list. And for the items that are in that gray list, the rep is able to download it, but they're not able, that application isn't able to connect to email, internet, any sensitive databases until it's been properly vetted. At that time, it'll either be added to the approved list or block list. So it really helps to prevent the spread of malware, ransomware, things like that that are prevalent in the news today. On the far right, you'll see Application Access Manager. In Application Access Manager, I talked earlier about how humans log into the vault to gain access to credentials, but there's also applications that need access to credentials to connect to other applications and databases. If you think about DevOps as well, those DevOps processes need access to secrets. So CyberArk with our Application Access Manager gives those applications the ability to connect to the vault securely to retrieve those credentials as needed or those secrets as needed, significantly reducing the attack surface. Now you don't have to have those credentials stored or embedded within that application or in a less secure database. All those credentials are being stored within the vault, and then you don't have to worry about also taking those applications down or going out and manually updating those credentials within those applications. The credentials are going to be rotated in accordance with company policy within the vault. They're going to be unique, meet complexity requirements, all that good stuff. And that application or that DevOps tool is going to have access to those most current credentials and secrets once they've been rotated. Not only does this help from a security standpoint, but it's also great from a compliance and from an efficiency standpoint. You're making sure that all your applications and databases, things like that, are staying in accordance with company policy when it comes to rotation and complexity requirements. So it's helping from a compliance standpoint. And then from an efficiency standpoint, you don't have to worry about your IT team having to manually go and rotate all those credentials. So a huge efficiency play there as well. And then finally, one that a lot of organizations don't think about initially is time to value. So as you buy applications that need access to credentials, if that application or tool integrates with CyberArk, they're able to pull those credentials from the vault without having, so when you're implementing it, you don't have to worry about going around the organization, getting those credentials, embedding them within the application. You're able to just connect it to the vault and then retrieve those credentials as needed. So there's a huge time to value for those tools as well. So one of the things that we talked about is the ability to automate the rotation of creds in the event of a compromise or a theft. So with CyberArk, as you have, as CyberArk is performing analytics on activity that's taking place within the enterprise password vault, it is looking for anomalies and suspicious behavior, and it's building a baseline for that activity. Any anomalies that are identified to that activity can be generated, will generate an alert that can then be sent to tools like SIMs and SOARs and other things that will allow automated rotation of those credentials, or actually blocking a user as well. Privilege Session Manager, I talked a little bit about this earlier when we talked about recording of privileged user activity, but it's a lot more than just recording of the activity. We talked about the attack chain lifecycle and how a user that gains access, how they like to use that access then to move laterally throughout the network, see what they have access to, escalate privileges until they're able to find what they're looking for. With Privilege Session Manager, really from a security standpoint, it starts off by preventing that user or their device from ever seeing that privileged credential. So it helps from that standpoint. If somebody gains access to that endpoint, they're not going to be able to see the privileged credential to access a particular application. So with Privilege Session Manager, think of a jump server between the enterprise password vault and the application. It's going to create a secure, isolated session to that application, so that user's not going to be able to use that to move laterally throughout the network. They're going to be isolated to that one application. We're going to be able to monitor that user's behavior. So every mouse click and keystroke that that person performs is going to be video recorded and can be used to track and detect suspicious behavior. It could be used for forensic purposes later on if an attack is later on identified. So it gives that capability. In addition, if the SOC is monitoring that person's activity and identifies that there's some suspicious behavior taking place, they're able to go and kill that session in progress. So a lot of value for that Privilege Session Manager, either isolating the session, monitoring that usage, recording that activity, and giving the ability to kill a session in real time. Hopefully, keeping that attacker from gaining access to what they're looking for there. Okay, so with the Core Pass solution, we've talked about analytics, and the three components of the Core Pass solution are the enterprise password vault, where the credentials are stored, rotated, make sure they meet complexity requirements, monitored, and so on. The enterprise password vault is sharing that activity that it's monitoring with our privileged threat analytics engine. And the PTA is also pulling in information from other tools like SIMs, Active Directory, Amazon Web Services, network, and so on, and performing targeted detection of unwanted and unusual behavior, which may indicate malicious behavior. It's identifying anomalous privileged user activity. It's collecting focus on privileged user activity. So basically, it's building that baseline I talked about earlier and identifying any suspicious activity, generating alerts, things like that. And then from there, if a suspicious activity is detected, we give the client the ability to automate either blocking or rotating those credentials. So hopefully blocking that attacker from gaining access to what they're looking for that way as well. So the solution benefits for CyberArk, really the first thing that most people think of is on the security side and mitigating the security risk. Understanding where privileged credentials are located, you're not able to secure what you don't know about. So if there are things out in the environment that have privileged credentials associated with them that aren't being locked down by the vault. You want to make sure that those get added into CyberArk and secured. You want to help reduce that attack surface by doing that. Automating and securing of passwords and SSH keys. We talked about before how most organizations have at least 3 times as many privileged credentials as they have employees. It's a very daunting task to be able to do that manually. CyberArk automates that, giving back your, or providing you with a secure way to make sure that those credentials meet complexity requirements, are rotated in accordance with company policy, and helps you maintain that compliance as well. Session isolation, which we talked about before with the privileged session manager, helps to prevent those attackers from moving laterally throughout the network. Also helps to protect against the spread of malware and ransomware and so on, and be able to detect and respond to those type of attacks. Reducing operational overhead and complexity. Manually rotating those credentials, those 3 times as many as you have employees, is a very daunting task. So freeing up IT staff to work on more value-added activities is a big benefit there as well. Improving regulatory compliance, accelerating the time to value. We have over 200 out-of-the-box certified integrations today that allow organizations to easily connect to either the vault to pull credentials as needed, or to pull information from the vault for reporting, analytics, and so on, to help prioritize any attacks that are identified that involve privileged credentials, making sure that those get escalated accordingly and addressed accordingly as well. And then, one of the things I mentioned earlier was identity-centric, improving overall visibility, allowing your organization to become more identity-centric when it comes to security by identifying the who that is accessing those credentials and allowing you to understand the why that they were accessing those credentials and what they were doing as well. CyberArk, a lot of the things I talked about before, most organizations think of CyberArk as pretty much our on-prem and hybrid offerings. But we also most recently issued our SaaS portfolio, which includes our Endpoint Privilege Manager and Alero, which are offered via SaaS, as well as our Privilege Cloud. So if Core PAS isn't something that you feel that you can manage it internally, and you need some help with getting that set up and having an organization manage that for you, CyberArk offers the Privilege Cloud, which is a SaaS-based solution. And then finally, CyberArk, we recognize that security is a team game. We recognize that there isn't one solution out there that can help you meet all of your security needs. So we build integrations with world-class organizations in the security space to help make you more secure, more compliant, and more efficient. And we're constantly working with our clients to understand the different tools that they're leveraging to help and adding to this ecosystem based on client requests. So Steve, thanks for the opportunity to come here and speak about CyberArk and how we can help secure privileged credentials and the importance of privileged credentials. I'll pass it back over to you now to talk about the integrations that we have in place.
Great, thank you, Brian. So some fantastic solutions from CyberArk. And what most of you on this webinar already probably have CyberArk in your environment, as well as NonStop in your environment. Most, as Brian mentioned, most of the Fortune 500 uses CyberArk currently, and most of Fortune 500 uses NonStop currently. So you've got both in your environment. And up until this point, up until recently, that was a very manual or disjointed process where you would integrate most of your IT infrastructure with CyberArk, but NonStop was kind of still left up to manual processes, or it was a disjointed process. So a couple of years ago, XYPRO partnered up with CyberArk to address some of the market needs for the NonStop community and how we can better plug in the NonStop with CyberArk. And our first integration is XYGATE Identity Connector for CyberArk. This is mainly an integration for the enterprise password vault. So the ability to vault your NonStop credentials in the CyberArk password vault enterprise vault, and allows all of those policies and processes and automation that CyberArk is good at to flow down to the nonstop. This is the only CyberArk certified integration for the nonstop. So if you want a certified integration that's not just some scripts or something ad hoc, this is the only CyberArk certified integration that exists. And what does a typical use case look like for this? So a user would log into CyberArk and check out nonstop credentials, so super or some other privileged access credentials. CyberArk would assign that user the password and let's say would put a timer on it for 3 hours. So the user has access to super for 3 hours. What would typically happen is CyberArk, after those 3 hours have expired, CyberArk EPV would go out and rotate those credentials, locking that user out. And this would typically be done in Active Directory, in Linux, on the IBM mainframe, Salesforce, etc. The nonstop, unfortunately, was a manual process. So the credentials could be rotated in CyberArk, but because there's no connector, there's no integration between CyberArk and nonstop, somebody would have to send an email to a nonstop administrator, and a nonstop administrator would have to manually reconcile that password on the nonstop with CyberArk, meaning they'd have to log into CyberArk, see what the rotated password was, and then take that password and update all of your nonstop endpoints with that new password. Now, there's a risk there because that user only had access for 3 hours, for example. Once those 3 hours are up, nonstop or CyberArk rotates that password right away, but there's still a delay in the time that that password is rotated to the time that email is sent to the nonstop administrator, waiting for that nonstop administrator to pick up that ticket and go in and manually rotate all of the passwords. So in theory, that user had access for much longer than they were allowed to. What our integration with CyberArk will do is all of that process is still the same. User would go into CyberArk, check out a password. They check out a password for 3 hours. As soon as their 3 hours are up, CyberArk will rotate that password and automatically synchronize it with the nonstop. No manual intervention, no email, no manual processes. Nobody has to get in between. This connector will just synchronize everything back and forth. All of your CyberArk policies, password policies that apply to other platforms can now flow into nonstop as well. So if you've got password complexity rules or other things that you need enforced, and those are enforced on other systems and platforms and applications within CyberArk, they can now be enforced on nonstop as well. So this is our identity connector for CyberArk, which is available right now. A new enhancement to our identity connector for CyberArk is the ability to vault CLIM credentials. So on the nonstop, you've got your disk I/O, your network I/O, even you've got telco CLIMs where all of these processes are offloaded to these external Debian Linux boxes. Those have credentials as well. They've got root credentials, they've got other types of privileged credentials that you would use to manage or do other activities on the CLIM. Most of the custom integrations that I know between CyberArk and nonstop are just scripts that will allow you to rotate the guardian password, the super password, or the operating system password with no visibility into the CLIM. Our latest release of Identity Connector for CyberArk allows you to vault and rotate your CLIM credentials as well. This is just part of the product and enhancement or a new feature that we've introduced recently. But now you can store your root password or other privileged access credentials within the vault, and then enforce the same policies from CyberArk. The architecture is very, very lightweight. The installation of this entire thing takes about 15 minutes. We're using industry standard protocols, so nothing proprietary. It's all SCIM 2.0. It's a lightweight microservice deployment. So you would install the package, and within a few minutes and a couple of configuration settings, you're up and running. Everything's encrypted. You get full visibility into auditing and logging of everything this connector is doing, as well as integration with merged audit. So all of the activity that is going back and forth from CyberArk will get captured and delivered to merged audit, which then you can run reports against, analytics again, forward to Security One or your SIM or other types of analytics devices. got full visibility and integration with the solution. And it can support multiple nodes, so you don't have to. It's not a single node infrastructure. When you provision credentials in CyberArk or vault credentials within CyberArk, it's got the ability to connect to multiple nodes at the same time and reconcile and synchronize those passwords against multiple nodes. One of our newest integrations, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this, is integration with the Privileged Session Manager that Brian was talking about. So what we're ultimately trying to do is reduce the attack surface when it comes to NonStop. And we figured what better way to do this by leveraging the abilities that CyberArk already has. So one of the things that we need to be able to do, and NonStop has its own personality that doesn't organically fit into most enterprise solutions, is figure out how we would address things like block mode and 6530 emulation and those types of things. And then being able to handle all that while not losing visibility into the session, into the user, where the user is coming from. So working in conjunction with CyberArk, we've been developing an integration for the Privileged Session Manager to allow NonStop to more naturally fit into that solution. So as Brian was mentioning earlier about reducing the attack surface by using PSM and being able to record all of your session activity and being able to control commands and subcommands and those types of things. With this integration, NonStop now will be able to participate in that workflow. So what a typical use case would look like is a user would, just like Brian mentioned, would check out a password from the vault, and then they'd be logged into this jump server, the CyberArk jump server. And typically the jump server would see their session IP address, the IP address and the username that they're originating from. Unfortunately, NonStop has some unique personalities that make it, that allow it to do what it needs to do, but it doesn't, again, translate to other solutions. So, for example, if you're logging into this jump server, really the only session that you're going to be able to establish with a NonStop is going to be through SSH, and you're going to lose that 6530 emulation, you're going to lose block mode capabilities, and some of the other things that NonStop applications rely on. The other thing is you would lose visibility into the user's original session. For example, things like IP address and their Windows username. So without this new integration that we've built, you would only see in the NonStop audits the IP address of the jump server. You wouldn't see the IP address of the workstation that the user is originating from. You would also lose visibility into their Windows username, things like their Windows username and other attributes. So when you're looking at your NonStop audits, which is a requirement for most compliance frameworks, you're going to see a lot of either gaps in your data or data that isn't represented entirely correctly. So you're going to be seeing the session of, or you're going to be seeing the IP address of the jump server. You're going to be seeing the username of the jump server, those types of things. And this is something that customers that have been trying to integrate with CyberArk have come to us routinely asking, what can we do about it? What can we do about it? What can we do about it? So that's where we decided to partner up with CyberArk on this new integration. What our new integration will do is deliver a driver on the CyberArk jump server, which will allow you to take advantage of all of the emulation, the 6530 emulation capabilities, being able to leverage and audit block mode and see the original IP address, see the original username. So the NonStop audits will now have visibility into the originating user. So we'll get visibility all the way back. So if it's Michael Scott that's logging in from his workstation, and even though he's using CyberArk and being able to leverage all the capabilities of CyberArk, he still does not lose any functionality that he's used to when connecting to NonStop. He still gets the emulator, he still gets block mode. And then the NonStop has all of the visibility into who Michael Scott is, where he's connecting from, and what he's doing. All of that then can then be forwarded to your to your log analyzer or your SIM or your SOAR or wherever you want to send it to for analytics. And now you've got full context. Now you've got full visibility. The audits on the NonStop end will match the audits on the CyberArk end, and you're going to see the complete picture. Whereas without this integration, you're going to get gaps in your data, or you're going to have mismatches in what the data is looking at. So you're going to spend a lot of manual effort having to piece that information together. This is as I mentioned with the identity connector for CyberArk, this is available now. This will allow you to rotate and manage your privilege credentials within the enterprise vault. The installation on the NonStop end only takes a few minutes. You've got to download a connector on the CyberArk end as well, just so CyberArk is aware that you're connecting to a NonStop. That's available on the CyberArk marketplace right now. So you would get the connector from XYPRO, you'd go on the CyberArk marketplace, download the other end of it from them and install it. And we've had customers have this up and running within minutes. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is simplify and centralize password management. As Brian mentioned, the attack surface is large when it comes to credential theft and being able to leverage credentials for malicious activity. So CyberArk is in most environments already. There's no reason why NonStop cannot participate with the capabilities that CyberArk provides. So that's what these integrations will allow you to do is plug in your NonStop seamlessly into your existing CyberArk infrastructure, for the goal of really eliminating manual process. The more manual process you have, the more gaps you're going to have in those processes, and the more opportunity exists for somebody to make an error or overlook something or something to occur, which then a malicious attacker can take advantage of. And being able to enforce policy management at the enterprise level. So if you've got enterprise policy set up, there's no reason why those can't be enforced to every application, every endpoint. And now the NonStop can participate in that. All of this helps you simplify audit and compliance. Is I know a lot of you deal with a very manual processes sometimes, or very labor-intensive processes when it comes to audit and compliance activity. You know, something like this will eliminate a big portion of that and really help you focus on other areas that need attention and not have to worry about credential and password management. Again, allows NonStop to seamlessly participate with the rest of the enterprise. There's no reason now where NonStop has to be managed separately than the rest of the enterprise. And it's got quick time to value. I mean, something like this, the installation is very quick. Once you're up and running, you're going to get immediate value by not having to manually manage and rotate credentials and eliminate those manual processes. As Brian said, there's 3 times more credentials that exist in most organizations than there are people. And just think about it. Most of the time, those credentials are not being managed properly. They're either not being rotated, or for the fear of breaking something, or it's just too labor intensive, or a variety of reasons. So they sit there stale. They sit there for years at a time, not being managed. And then ultimately, this is what ends up sinking a lot of organizations, is attackers figure out how to take advantage of this. Boom, they're in, and they start moving around the system and exfiltrating data. So putting something like this in place will eliminate the NonStop from being used as an attack vector. And with that, we appreciate everybody's time this morning, this afternoon. Thank you for participating. I hope you found the session very useful. If there's any questions, we can take them now. I'm going to just check the question box.
Hi, Steve. This is Lisa. I've got some questions that were sent directly. If you want to start with those and give folks a chance to put their questions in chat if they would like. Let me see here. The first question, how long does installation take?
No, installation, like I mentioned, is very, very quickly. We've had some customers, if you've got all the prerequisites met, if you've got the right operating system versions, those types of things, installation on the NonStop end is under 15 minutes if everything's in place. And same thing on the CyberArk end. You just download the connector from the CyberArk marketplace, install it, put some configuration settings, and start vaulting your NonStop credentials, start vaulting your CLIM credentials, and eliminate that as an attack vector.
Okay, thank you. And here's a question that came during the registration process. Can I enforce all the same CyberArk policies on the NonStop?
Yes. So with this connector, with Identity Connector for CyberArk, so CyberArk will treat NonStop just like it would any other endpoint that it manages. So if you apply policies at a global or enterprise level, or if you want to apply policies at the NonStop level, you've got the ability to do that. So you can enforce your policies through CyberArk, and now NonStop does not have to be a disjointed or a manual effort to synchronize those policies with the enterprise.
Okay, and we finally got a chat question. Apologies for joining late. Does this integration support block mode audits?
Yes, the new integration that we're working on will allow you to take full capabilities of all of the 6530 emulation, the block mode abilities within NonStop applications, and with XAC, XYGATE access control on your system, you'll be able to audit all of that activity while still leveraging going through CyberArk. So yes.
Okay, and that will do it for the questions at the moment. I'd like to thank Brian for participating in this webinar with us jointly.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Brian, any last words? Anything you want to leave the attendees with?
No, yet. Thank you for the opportunity to come here today, and hopefully you found our presentation useful and you understand a little bit better about what CyberArk can do to help secure privileged credentials and why privileged credentials are so important to secure within your environment. Thanks for that opportunity.
Yeah, our pleasure. And then being able to integrate NonStop with CyberArk and leverage all of the CyberArk capabilities just makes this a more complete, more robust solution, and eliminates, like I mentioned, having NonStop being used as an attack vector in your environment. So any questions, any follow-ups? We love talking about this stuff. So guys, please feel free to follow up on either through email, our website, LinkedIn, Twitter. We're happy to answer questions and give you more information. So with that, appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, everyone.